The day my son got married was the day I lost him. Not to love, not to happiness. To a woman who had already decided, before the champagne was poured and the vows were spoken, that I was an obstacle to be removed. I sat at that reception table in a dress I'd spent 3 weeks picking out, watching my son laugh with strangers, and I felt something shift inside me. Quiet, cold, permanent, like a door closing somewhere I couldn't see. I didn't know it yet, but the wedding wasn't a beginning. It was an eviction notice dressed in white. If this story speaks to you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. I want to be honest with you about something before I tell you what happened to me. I was not a perfect mother. I was not always patient. I did not always say the right thing at the right time, and there were moments in Ryan's childhood when I put my pride ahead of his feelings and didn't apologize the way I should have. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to picture me as someone who walked through her life without making mistakes. I made plenty, but none of my mistakes deserved what came next. Not even close. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 63 years old. I worked for 31 years as an office administrator at a civil engineering firm, raised my son alone after his father passed when Ryan was 11, paid off a house with my own hands, and built a life that was small in some ways but entirely mine. I didn't have a sprawling social circle. I didn't take expensive vacations, but I had my independence, I had my routines, I had my son. And then I met Vanessa Reed, and I understood for the first time in my life what it feels like to be sized up like real estate. Ryan called me on a Thursday evening in late October to tell me he was bringing someone home for dinner. He was 34 at the time, living in a newer part of the city, working in commercial real estate, doing well for himself. He dated on and off over the years, nothing serious that I knew of, and when he told me her name, Vanessa Reed, I felt the normal flutter of maternal curiosity. Not worry, not suspicion, just the ordinary hope that my son had found someone who made him happy. She arrived wearing a cream blouse and a smile that was perfectly calibrated. That's the word I keep coming back to when I think about that first evening. Calibrated. She complimented my cooking before she'd taken a second bite. She asked thoughtful questions about my job, my neighborhood, my house, this house, the one I'd lived in for 22 years, and she listened to my answers with the kind of focused attention that most people reserve for job interviews. I remember thinking, this woman is very good with people. I didn't yet understand that being good with people and genuinely caring about people are two completely different things. Ryan looked happy, lighter somehow than I'd seen him in years. He laughed more easily. He touched her hand across the table without thinking about it. And when they left that night, and I stood at my front door watching their car pull away, I told myself I was being ridiculous. That the slight unease I felt was just the selfish discomfort of a mother watching her son love someone new. I told myself to let it go. I should have listened to that unease. It knew something I didn't. They got engaged 6 months later. Ryan called me before he proposed. Called, not visited, which I noted but said nothing about. And he told me he'd found the one and that he hoped I'd be happy for him. I told him I was. I told him Vanessa seemed like a wonderful woman and that I couldn't wait to celebrate with them. And I meant it. Or I wanted to mean it, which I think is close enough. The engagement party was held at a restaurant Vanessa had chosen. A sleek, modern place downtown where everything on the menu came in portions too small to be satisfying and the wine cost more per glass than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I sat at a table with people I didn't know while Ryan moved through the room with Vanessa on his arm, and I noticed, not for the first time, that he kept forgetting to bring her back to where I was sitting. During the toasts, Vanessa's mother, a polished woman named Diane Reed, who looked like she'd spent decades being effortlessly superior, spoke at length about her daughter's discerning taste and her refusal to settle for anything less than she deserved. Everyone laughed warmly. I smiled and lifted my glass. On the drive home, alone, I thought about that phrase, refusal to settle. I thought about Ryan's apartment, which Vanessa had already begun redecorating with a designer she'd found. I thought about the restaurant, which Ryan had paid for. I thought about the ring on Vanessa's finger, which I happened to know cost more than Ryan earned in 2 months because he told me he'd needed to put part of it on a payment plan. I poured myself a glass of water when I got home, stood at my kitchen window, and stared at the backyard my husband and I had planted together before he got sick. I told myself to stop being uncharitable, that these were small things, that I was looking for problems where none existed. I was wrong about that too. The wedding was set for the following June. 14 months of planning, most of which Vanessa managed with the precision of a military operation. I was consulted on exactly 4 decisions: the color of my mother of the groom corsage, whether I preferred chicken or salmon at the reception, what size table I needed for my side of the family, and whether I had any dietary restrictions. 4 decisions for my only son's wedding. I said nothing. I sent the RSVPs she requested, confirmed my dietary preferences, no shellfish, nothing I hadn't already told Ryan 100 times. And I showed up to the bridal shower with a card and a gift that Vanessa opened with practiced enthusiasm and set aside without reading what I'd written inside. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ryan came to see me alone. He sat at my kitchen table the way he used to as a teenager, elbows on the wood, hands folded together, and he told me that Vanessa had found a house, a beautiful house in a better part of the city, their words, with a yard and an extra bedroom and good schools in the district even though they didn't have children yet. The house cost more than they had. They were short. He didn't ask me outright. He never did, because he knew he didn't have to. He told me the situation, and he looked at me with those eyes, His father's eyes, dark brown and impossibly familiar. And I felt the thing I always felt when Ryan needed something, the automatic, almost physical pull to fix it. I loaned them $80,000. I want you to understand what that number means. That was not extra money I had sitting in an account I'd forgotten about. That was savings I had accumulated over 31 years of working, money I had set aside for emergencies, for medical expenses, for the possibility of a future I wasn't sure about yet. I gave it to my son because I loved him, because I believed in his happiness, and because I told myself that people who love each other don't need to make everything into a transaction. I wrote up a simple loan agreement, Ryan's idea, he said, and I thought that was responsible of him, outlining that the money was a loan, not a gift, to be repaid over time. Ryan signed it. I kept the original. I thought that was the end of it. I was so catastrophically wrong that even now, 3 years later, I have to stop and breathe when I think about how trusting I was. The wedding was on a Saturday in the middle of June, the kind of perfect summer day that feels designed by someone who wants everything to look good in photographs. The ceremony was held in a renovated estate outside the city, all white flowers and golden light, and I sat in the front row in a dusty blue dress I'd bought specifically because Ryan had mentioned once, years ago, that he liked that color on me. I'd remembered. I always remembered things like that. Ryan cried when he saw Vanessa walking down the aisle. I watched my son's face. The boy I had raised, the boy I had sat with through every fever and every heartbreak and every 3 in the morning moment when the world felt too heavy. And I felt something so complicated that I still can't name it cleanly. Pride, love, loss. The particular grief of watching someone you love belong more completely to another person than to you. Vanessa was beautiful. I'll give her that much, and I'll give it without hesitation, because it's true. She was stunning in her gown, precise and luminous, and the way she looked at Ryan when he took her hands was convincing enough that I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the unease was just my own loneliness talking. Maybe this was going to be fine. The ceremony was lovely. I didn't cry until the vows, and when I did, I pressed my fingertips against the corner of my eye and told myself to hold it together, because I did not want to be the weeping mother-in-law in the photographs. I should have saved my tears for what came next. The reception was held in a ballroom attached to the estate. Round tables, centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, a band that played standards between the toasts. I was seated at the family table, which felt appropriate, though I noticed that Diane Reed was seated to Ryan's left, and I was 2 chairs further down, between Ryan's college friend whose name I always mixed up, and an aunt of Vanessa's I'd never met before. The first hour was fine, the food was good, the champagne was cold. I made conversation with the people around me, and I smiled until my face ached, and I told myself I was having a wonderful time. Then came the toasts. Ryan's best man spoke first, funny, warm, a story about the 2 of them in college that made everyone laugh. Diane Reed spoke second, gracious, composed, polished as always, the kind of speech that sounds heartfelt but doesn't actually give anything away. Then a cousin of Vanessa's. Then Ryan's college roommate. And then Vanessa took the microphone. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because I've replayed it so many times that I know every word exactly as it was said. Vanessa stood up in her wedding gown, champagne glass in hand, and she smiled at the room the way she smiled at everything. Wide, practiced, luminous. And she said she wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who had made their life together possible. She thanked her parents. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked the vendors, which made people laugh. And then she turned toward me, directly toward me, so that every head in that room turned with her. And she said, and of course we have to thank Evelyn, Ryan's mom, who was so generous with her support. Honestly, without her contribution, we might still be figuring out how to make this all work. She paused, and the smile stayed exactly where it was. And she added, it must be so reassuring to know that your investment is in such good hands. The room laughed, warmly, without malice, because they didn't understand what had just happened. They heard a daughter-in-law thanking her mother-in-law. They heard gratitude. What I heard was something else entirely. Investment. Not loan. Not help. Investment. A word that turned my $80,000 into a business decision, a calculated risk, something a smart person put money into hoping for a return. It made me sound like a venture capitalist, not a mother. It took the most personal thing I had ever done for my son and translated it into the language of transactions. And then it invited an entire room to laugh at the transaction with her. I felt the blood leave my face. I felt the smile freeze on my lips. I felt the woman across from me glance at me with a flicker of something. Sympathy? Pity? And then look away. I lifted my champagne glass and tilted it toward Vanessa with a smile that cost me more than the loan ever did, and I said nothing. Ryan was looking at his new wife with an expression of uncomplicated adoration. He had not noticed what she said, or if he had, it hadn't registered. Or, and this is the possibility I keep pushing away because I can't stand to believe it, it had registered, and he decided to let it go. I sat with that for the rest of the evening. I danced once, with Ryan's college friend, because it would have looked strange not to. I ate my salmon. I spoke to Diane Reed for exactly 4 minutes near the dessert table, during which she told me that Vanessa had always known what she wanted, and smiled at me in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And then I found a quiet corner of that beautiful ballroom, and I stood there alone for a moment, just a moment, and I thought about that loan agreement sitting in the filing cabinet in my home office, the one with Ryan's signature on it. For the first time since I'd written the check, I was glad I'd kept it. 8. I drove myself home that night. Ryan and Vanessa left for their honeymoon, 2 weeks in Portugal, which I knew about from the registry. And I told myself the drive home was fine, the house was fine, everything was fine. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table until midnight, staring at nothing. The next morning, I woke early, the way I always do. And I made coffee, and I sat with it on my back porch in the Sunday quiet, and I tried to talk myself out of the feeling that had settled in my chest the night before. It was thick and cold, and it had no clean name. Not anger, not sadness. Something older and harder. The specific ache of realizing that someone has already decided what you are to them, and what you are is useful. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself it was one comment at a reception, and maybe I'd misread the tone. I told myself that Vanessa had been nervous, and the words had come out wrong. I told myself a lot of things that morning, sitting in the yard my husband had helped me plant, with my coffee going cold in my hands. Then, at 9:47 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I set down my cup. I went to the door. I opened it. Vanessa was standing on my porch in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, her hair already perfect, holding a leather portfolio under one arm. She was not supposed to be leaving for Portugal until that afternoon. She was not supposed to be here at all. She smiled. That same smile. Calibrated. Precise. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said. "Do you mind if I come in? There are a few things I'd like to discuss with you." I stepped back and let her in. Because what else do you do when your son's wife appears at your door at 9:47 on a Sunday morning, looking like she has a PowerPoint presentation ready? And I led her to the kitchen and I offered her coffee, which she declined, and we sat down across from each other at the table where I had eaten breakfast alone for 22 years. She opened the portfolio. She set 2 documents on the table between us. "I know this might feel sudden," she said, and her voice had shifted, still smooth, still measured, but with something harder underneath it now, like tile under carpet. "But Ryan and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about both our futures and yours." I looked at the documents without touching them. The first was a brochure for a senior living facility called Sunridge Gardens. Full color. Beautiful photographs of white-haired people playing board games and tending raised flower beds. The second was a legal document, several pages, dense with language, with small colored tabs marking the signature lines. "We think Sunridge would be a wonderful fit for you," Vanessa said. "It's 20 minutes from the house, great staff, beautiful grounds. You'd have your own room, your own routines, and you'd have people around you." I looked up from the documents and I looked at her face, and I said very carefully, "I have people around me." "Of course," she said. "But Ryan worries. We both do. You're here alone. This is a big house for one person. And frankly," she paused, and the pause was not accidental, "there have been some concerns about your ability to manage things independently." The air in my kitchen changed. "What concerns?" I said. It came out flat. Not a question. A wall. Vanessa tilted her head. "Small things. Forgetting appointments, confusing dates. Ryan mentioned you left the stove on twice last fall." She said it gently, almost softly, the way you discuss something genuinely worrying. "We're not saying anything is wrong. We just think it might be time to start thinking about next steps." I sat back in my chair and I looked at this woman who had been married to my son for less than 24 hours. And I understood in that moment, with the sudden, sickening clarity of a window being thrown open in a cold room, exactly what was happening. She wasn't worried about me. She had come to collect. "And the house?" I said. Vanessa turned to the second document. "We've spoken with a financial advisor. Given the loan you made to us and Ryan's equity in the property, there are some things we'd need to restructure. If you move to Sunridge, the simplest arrangement would be—" "Stop." She stopped. The smile held. "I want you to leave my house," I said. A flicker. Just for a second. Something crossed her face that was not quite surprise and not quite anger, but something between them, something controlled and calculating. Then the smile settled back into place. "Evelyn, I understand this is a lot to process." I said leave. She gathered her portfolio. She stood up from my table, in my house, a house I had paid for with 30 years of my own work, and she picked up the Sunridge brochure but left the legal document sitting there, as if she'd forgotten it, or as if she'd intended to leave it all along. "Take some time," she said at the door, the warmth back in her voice like nothing had happened. "Talk to Ryan when he's back. We just want what's best for everyone." Then she walked down my front path to the car I hadn't noticed parked at the curb, got in, and drove away. I stood at my open door for a long time after the car disappeared. Then I went to my home office. I opened the filing cabinet. I found the loan agreement with Ryan's signature on it, and I held it in my hands, and I read every word. $80,000, clearly documented, signed, witnessed by my neighbor Patricia, whose signature was right there at the bottom of the page. I set the document on my desk. I sat down in my chair, and for the first time since the night before, I stopped trying to talk myself out of what I knew. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a daughter-in-law who'd made a clumsy comment at a wedding. This was a plan. This had been a plan for longer than I wanted to think about. Maybe since the first dinner, when Vanessa had asked all those thoughtful questions about my house, while I mistook her attention for warmth. I thought about the stove comments. Left the stove on twice last fall. Ryan had mentioned it in passing one evening, casually, the way you mentioned something small, but now I understood that it hadn't been casual. It had been recorded, filed, ready to be produced as evidence of my decline. They were building a case against me, had been building it for months. Perhaps longer. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that, and I was proud of it. My hands were completely steady as I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I began to write down every detail I could remember from the past year. Every conversation, every visit, every moment that had seemed small at the time and now revealed itself for what it actually was. I wrote for 2 hours. I filled 14 pages. Then I picked up the phone and called my doctor to schedule a full evaluation. I called my bank to review the loan account. I called Patricia next door, who had witnessed the loan agreement, and I told her there might come a day when I needed her to confirm what she'd seen. She said, of course, without even asking why. And then I sat in my office, in the quiet of my house, with the afternoon light coming through the window, and I let myself feel, really feel, the full weight of what had happened. My son had married a woman who saw me as an obstacle. He had taken $80,000 from me and signed a document calling it a loan. And now someone in that marriage, maybe him, maybe her, maybe the two of them together over dinner while I sat alone in this house, had decided that the most efficient solution was to remove me from the picture entirely, to package me up in a brochure with pictures of flower beds and board games and sign away whatever claim I had to the life I'd built. Ryan was in Portugal. He wouldn't be back for 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to figure out how much danger I was actually in and what I was going to do about it. I picked up my pen. I turned to a fresh page of the legal pad. At the top I wrote, what I know, what I can prove, what comes next. Then I started writing. The 2 weeks Ryan was in Portugal were the quietest and most productive of my entire life. I didn't sit around feeling sorry for myself. I didn't call anyone to cry about what had happened. I made coffee every morning at 6:15. I sat at my desk with my legal pad and my files, and I worked, because that's what I knew how to do. 31 years of office administration teaches you something about documentation, about keeping records clean and organized, about never assuming a verbal agreement is the same as a written one. I had built my professional life around the understanding that paper is the only thing that survives a dispute. And now, for the first time, I was applying that understanding to my own survival. I called my doctor on that Monday morning, Dr. Linda Marsh, who had been my physician for 11 years and who knew me well enough to skip the pleasantries. I told her I needed a full cognitive evaluation, not because I thought anything was wrong, but because I needed documentation proving nothing was wrong. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Evelyn, has someone suggested that something is wrong? Someone has implied it, I said, and I need to be ahead of it. She scheduled me for the following Thursday. Full panel, memory assessments, executive function, processing speed, the works. She also pulled my medical records together into a summary, because she understood without my having to explain it fully what kind of situation tends to produce a request like mine. I also called Thomas Hale that same morning. Thomas had been my attorney for 15 years, a quiet, methodical man who specialized in estate planning and property law and who spoke in careful sentences that never wasted a word. I told him what had happened at my door Sunday morning. I told him about the brochure and the legal document Vanessa had left behind, which I'd read carefully 3 times before putting it in a folder. And I told him about the loan, the agreement, the signature. He was quiet in the way that Thomas was always quiet when he was thinking, which was a different kind of quiet than most people's silences. Then he said, don't move anything, don't sign anything, and bring me everything you have. I brought him everything I had. We met on Tuesday afternoon in his office downtown, and I laid it all out on his conference table. The loan agreement, the Sunridge brochure, the legal document Vanessa had left, my 14 pages of notes from the morning after. Thomas read everything with the focused stillness of a man who had spent his career understanding what other people's paperwork was actually trying to do. When he finished, he took off his glasses and set them on the table. This document she left, he said, tapping the pages Vanessa had brought. This isn't just restructuring. If you'd signed this, you would have effectively converted the loan into a gift, released your financial claim on the property, and designated Ryan as your primary decision-maker for any future medical or housing situations. I heard what he said. I let it sit for a second. She came to my house the morning after her wedding, I said, and tried to get me to sign away $80,000 and my legal autonomy. Yes, Thomas said. He didn't soften it. I appreciated that about him. What do I do? You document everything, he said. Every contact, every conversation, every unusual visit or phone call. You get your medical records in order, and you make sure that loan agreement is filed somewhere safe, not just your home office. Give me a copy. Give your neighbor a copy. Put one in a safety deposit box. I did all of that within 48 hours, and then I waited for Ryan to come home. He called me from the airport on a Friday evening, jet-lagged and cheerful, his voice carrying that loose warmth he always had after a good trip. He asked how I'd been. He told me Portugal was beautiful. He said Vanessa sent her love, which made something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice easy. When you've settled in, I said, I'd like to come over. There are some things I want to talk about. A small pause. Sure, Mom. Yeah, of course. Give us a few days to get back on our feet? Of course, I said. I gave them 5 days. Then I drove to their house, the house my money had helped purchase, on a Wednesday evening with a copy of the loan agreement in my bag and a very clear picture in my mind of exactly what I wanted to say. Ryan opened the door. He looked good. Tanned, rested, happy in the particular way of newlyweds who haven't yet had to navigate anything hard together. He hugged me at the door and brought me inside, and Vanessa was in the kitchen, and she turned when I came in and gave me the smile. That same, tireless, impeccable smile. and said, "Evelyn, it's so good to see you." "You too," I said, and I meant it the same way she did. We sat in their living room. The decor was all Vanessa, clean lines, neutral tones, everything selected with precision. I noticed there was no photograph of Ryan and me anywhere in the room. There was one of Ryan and Vanessa on their wedding day, framed beautifully on the mantel. There was one of Vanessa's family from what looked like a vacation somewhere coastal, but not one image of the boy I had raised in the house I had paid for. I noticed it. I said nothing about it. Ryan brought coffee. We made small talk about the honeymoon for a few minutes, the food in Lisbon, the hotel in Porto, a boat trip they'd taken along the coast. Vanessa described everything with the enthusiasm of a travel writer, and Ryan filled in details, and for a few minutes it almost felt normal. Almost. Then I set my bag on the coffee table and I said, quietly and without preamble, "Ryan, I need to talk to you about the visit Vanessa made to my house the morning after your wedding." The room changed temperature. Ryan looked at Vanessa. It was fast, just a flicker, but I saw it. The checking in, the "are we ready for this" look that passed between them like a current. Vanessa spoke first. "I wanted to have a conversation about the future," she said, her voice measured and reasonable. "I thought it was better to do it in person while things were calm." "You brought a legal document for me to sign," I said. "I brought some options." "It wasn't options, Vanessa. It was a document that would have transferred my financial rights to Ryan and released the loan as a gift." I had a lawyer look at it. Silence. Ryan put his coffee mug down very carefully. "You had a lawyer look at it?" "Yes." "Mom," he said it with a particular tired quality, the tone of someone who thinks the other person is making things more complicated than they need to be. "We were just trying to think ahead, about what makes sense for everyone. Ryan, I gave you $80,000, I said. I gave it to you because I love you, and because you needed it, and because I wanted you to have what you wanted. I signed a loan agreement with you because you suggested it, and I agreed because I thought it reflected both of us being responsible about a large amount of money. That document your wife brought to my door would have made the loan disappear and handed you control over where I live. That is not thinking ahead. That is something else entirely." He opened his mouth, closed it. Vanessa leaned forward. "Evelyn, we've noticed some things that concern us. Ryan has mentioned some memory issues. I had a full cognitive evaluation last week," I said. I opened my bag and took out the folder. Inside was a copy of Dr. Marsh's report. 6 pages, clean and conclusive. "Every measure is within normal range for my age. My memory is fine. My executive function is fine. I have no cognitive impairment." I slid the folder across the coffee table. Neither of them picked it up immediately. They looked at it the way you look at something you weren't expecting and aren't sure how to handle. That's great, Mom," Ryan said finally. He sounded like he was recalculating something. "I also want you to know," I continued, "that I've had the loan agreement reviewed and filed with my attorney, and that I have kept detailed records of every conversation related to the house and to my finances going back 18 months. I'm not telling you this to be adversarial. I'm telling you because I want us all to be operating with the same information." Vanessa sat back. The smile had not entirely disappeared, but it had changed quality. Thinned out, cooled. She was reassessing me. I could see it, and she didn't like what she was finding. "I don't understand why you're making this into a legal situation," Ryan said, and there was an edge in his voice now. Not anger exactly, but the defensive irritation of someone who'd expected an easier conversation. "I didn't make it a legal situation," I said. "A legal document appeared at my door. I responded accordingly." He looked at Vanessa again. This time she didn't look back. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and a feeling in my gut that was not victory. It was something grimmer than that, something like the satisfaction of having told the truth in a room where everyone would have preferred you stay quiet. It wasn't warm, but it was solid. What I didn't know yet was that I'd just shown them their first approach hadn't worked, and what that meant was that they were going to try something else. The campaign started subtly enough that I almost missed it. 2 weeks after that conversation, Ryan called to check on me, normal enough, but within 5 minutes had mentioned casually that his friend Marcus had run into me at the grocery store and thought I'd seemed confused. I had no memory of running into Marcus at any grocery store, and I told Ryan so. Ryan said Marcus was probably just misreading things, and the subject changed. Then Vanessa texted me, for the first time ever, to ask if I'd found a doctor I liked in my area. The question was strange. I had a doctor I'd been seeing for 11 years. Vanessa knew that. The text felt like a test, or like the beginning of a note in a file somewhere. Then Ryan's colleague Gary, whom I'd met exactly once at a company event, sent me a Facebook friend request, which I found strange enough that I mentioned it to Thomas Hale during our next check-in. Thomas said to accept nothing I wasn't sure about and to keep logging things. Then Patricia from next door called me on a Tuesday morning with something uncomfortable in her voice. "Evelyn," she said, "I don't want to upset you, but a woman came by yesterday while you were out. She was asking me questions." I went very still. "What kind of questions?" "About whether I'd noticed any changes in you, whether I'd seen anything worrying lately. She said she was a social worker doing a wellness check. She had a clipboard and everything." Patricia paused. "Evelyn, I didn't like her." "What did she look like?" Patricia described a woman in her late 30s, well-dressed, with dark hair. Not a description that matched any social worker I'd ever seen. I asked Patricia if she'd gotten a name or a badge number. She hadn't. The woman had been pleasant and professional and had left before Patricia thought to ask. I sat down on my couch after I hung up and I stared at the wall for a solid minute. Then I called Thomas. Someone is documenting a case against you, he said when I'd finished telling him. Building a picture of a woman whose neighbors are concerned, whose son is worried, who has shown signs of confusion. If they're planning a guardianship petition, this is how you lay the groundwork for it. Can they win? I said. If they file something, can they actually win? Thomas was quiet for a moment in that careful way of his. If they file an emergency petition and present a convincing enough picture, a judge could temporarily restrict your autonomy while the case is being evaluated. That's the window they'd want. Temporary restriction could mean temporary control over your assets. Including the house. Including any property your name is connected to, he said. Evelyn, I want you to think seriously about whether you want to stay where you are. I looked around my living room. 22 years of my life in those walls. The couch my husband and I had picked out together. The bookshelf Ryan and I had painted one rainy Saturday when he was 15 and thought he was too old to hang out with his mother, but did it anyway. The kitchen where I'd made every meal I could remember making. I'm not leaving, I said. I'm not suggesting you leave permanently. I'm suggesting you consider establishing a secondary residence, somewhere that's clearly and legally yours, that they have no financial or legal connection to. It makes the asset picture cleaner, and it removes you from proximity to surveillance. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called a real estate agent I trusted, a woman named Sandra Chu, who had helped me refinance my house years before, and I told her I was looking for a small apartment to rent. Good building, safe neighborhood, clean lease. Nothing fancy. Just mine. Sandra found me a place within 2 weeks. Second floor of a well-maintained building 20 minutes from my house, 1 bedroom, a small balcony that looked out onto a line of old oak trees. The landlord was a retired civil engineer, of all things, named Arthur Bent, who shook my hand when we met and said, Ms. Hart, I run a quiet building. I think you'll be comfortable here. I signed the lease on a Thursday afternoon. I did not tell Ryan. I did not tell Ryan because 3 days before I signed that lease, something happened that removed the last small part of me that was still trying to believe my son was being manipulated rather than participating. I'd gone to Ryan and Vanessa's house, unannounced, which I almost never did, but I was in the neighborhood after a meeting with Thomas, and I had paperwork Ryan needed to sign related to the loan repayment schedule Thomas was drawing up. I knocked. No one answered immediately. I was about to leave when I heard voices inside, Ryan's voice and Vanessa's, and something in the quality of the sound made me stop. The front window was cracked open. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was standing on my son's porch, but I could hear him, and what I heard was this. She had a lawyer look at everything, Vanessa. She had herself evaluated. She's building a file. And Vanessa's voice, calm and precise. Then we move faster. The longer we wait, the stronger her position gets. She's my mother. A pause, then. And this is your house, our house. The money she put in doesn't give her the right to be a problem forever. Silence from Ryan. The particular silence of a person who disagrees but isn't going to say so. I stepped back from the door. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. The money she put in doesn't give her the right to be a problem forever. I was a problem. That was how she described me to my son. Not as his mother, not as a woman who had given them $80,000 and signed a piece of paper in good faith, as a problem to be managed. And my son had been silent. That silence cost him something with me that I'm still not sure can be fully repaid. Not the money, not the house, something quieter and more essential. The certainty that when it came to a choice between protecting his wife's agenda and protecting his mother's dignity, he would choose me. He hadn't chosen me. He had chosen silence, which in that moment was its own kind of answer. I started the car. I drove to Sandra Chu's office, and I signed the lease for the apartment on the second floor with the oak trees outside the balcony. I wrote the first month's check, and I shook Arthur Bent's hand, and I drove home to start deciding what I would bring with me. Not everything. I wasn't abandoning my house, but I was establishing ground they couldn't reach, a life with a door that only I had the key to, an address that was not connected to any loan or any argument or any document Vanessa could produce on a Sunday morning with a smile and a leather portfolio. I moved the most important things over the following weekend. My files, my medical records, copies of every document Thomas had, my husband's watch, which I'd kept in my bedside drawer since the day he died, a few photographs, the things that were irreplaceable, not because they were valuable, but because they were mine in the way that no court and no legal document could touch. I told Patricia I was keeping the house, but spending more time elsewhere for a while. She nodded in the way of a woman who understood more than she was saying, and she told me she'd keep an eye on things while I was gone. Ryan finally called on a Tuesday, 10 days after I'd signed the lease. He asked if everything was okay because he hadn't heard from me. I told him everything was fine. He asked if I wanted to come to dinner on Saturday, and I said I'd check my schedule. He seemed slightly unnerved by that, by the fact that I had a schedule to check, that I didn't just say yes immediately the way I always had. Good. Let him be unnerved, because what was coming next was not going to be something any of us could navigate with a dinner invitation and a smile. I knew it. Thomas knew it. And somewhere in that house with the clean lines and the precise decor and no photograph of Ryan's mother anywhere on the walls, Vanessa knew it too. The question was who would move first. I didn't have to wait long for the answer. The call from Thomas came on a Monday morning in early November, 4 months after the wedding. I was at my apartment, the one with the oak trees outside the balcony, drinking my second cup of coffee and going through a folder of bank statements I'd been organizing. I had developed a habit by then of keeping my hands busy with something useful when I was anxious, and I had been anxious for weeks in the low-grade constant way of someone who knows something is coming but can't see exactly what shape it will take. Thomas didn't say good morning. He said, "They filed." I set down my coffee. "Emergency guardianship petition," he said. "Filed Friday afternoon with the county probate court. Hearing is scheduled for Thursday." 3 days. They'd given me 3 days. "Who filed it?" I said, though I already knew. "Ryan and Vanessa jointly. They have an attorney, Martin Cross. He does a fair amount of elder law work on the plaintiff side. He's competent. Evelyn, I want you to come in this afternoon. We have a lot to prepare." I hung up and sat very still for a moment. Outside, the oak trees were bare. November had stripped them clean, and the sky behind them was the flat white of a day that hasn't decided what it wants to do yet. I thought about the morning after the wedding, when Vanessa had sat at my kitchen table with her portfolio and her brochure and her legal document with the little colored tabs on the signature lines. I thought about how I'd told her to leave. I thought about how she'd smiled all the way to the door. She had moved faster than I expected, but she had not moved faster than I had prepared for. I got dressed, I drove to Thomas's office, and we went to work. The petition was 42 pages long. I read every word of it sitting across from Thomas in his conference room, and I want to tell you that I read it calmly and professionally, but that would not be entirely true. There were moments, specific sentences, specific phrases, where I had to stop and breathe through my nose and remind myself that anger was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Documentation was what I could afford. Clarity was what I could afford. Anger could wait. The petition described a woman I barely recognized. According to what Ryan and Vanessa's attorney had assembled, I was a 63-year-old widow showing progressive signs of cognitive decline, forgetfulness, confusion, difficulty managing daily tasks, isolation, and increasingly erratic behavior. There were signed statements from 3 people. Ryan, a man named Gerald Foss, who I had apparently concerned during an HOA meeting 6 months earlier, and a licensed clinical social worker named Dr. Patricia Olden, who had conducted a wellness assessment. The HOA meeting statement I remembered. I had argued, calmly, I thought, against a proposed landscaping fee that I believed was being mismanaged. Gerald Foss had been on the other side of that argument. His statement described me as agitated and unable to follow the thread of the discussion. I had been neither agitated nor confused. I had been correct about the landscaping fee, which had since been audited and partially refunded. None of that was in his statement. The social worker was the one who chilled me. Dr. Patricia Olden had conducted a home assessment at my house, not my apartment, which I hadn't been at regularly for weeks, and her report noted an untidy environment, minimal food in the refrigerator, and a subject who was defensive and resistant to support services. The house was not untidy. I had been spending most of my time at the apartment. Of course, the refrigerator was low, and yes, I had been resistant to whatever woman had shown up claiming to perform a wellness check, because I had known, by the time that happened, exactly what such a check was meant to produce. "They used the wellness check visit," I said to Thomas. "The one Patricia told me about. The woman who came to the neighborhood asking questions. She came back." "It appears so," Thomas said. "Dr. Olden's report is dated 3 weeks ago. Her assessment is the centerpiece of the medical argument." "Can we challenge it?" "We can challenge everything," Thomas said. "But we need to move strategically. The hearing is Thursday. Judge Eleanor Marsh will be presiding. She's thorough, experienced, not easily swayed by emotional arguments, which works in your favor." "What do we have?" Thomas opened his own folder. He was a list maker, Thomas, organized in the way of someone who understood that chaos was the enemy of justice. He walked me through what we had. Dr. Linda Marsh's full cognitive evaluation from the previous month, which was clean and comprehensive. The loan agreement, signed and witnessed. 18 months of documented contacts, dates, and conversations from my legal pad notes, which I had typed up and organized chronologically. Patricia's statement about the fake social worker visit. Records from my bank showing responsible financial management. 2 character witnesses Thomas had contacted, a former colleague of mine named Joanna Reyes, who had worked with me for 12 years, and Arthur Bent, my landlord, who had interacted with me regularly since I'd signed the lease. And one more thing. "Tell me about the voicemail," Thomas said. 3 weeks earlier, Vanessa had called me, not texted, called, and left a message when I didn't pick up. I had been in the habit by then of letting her calls go to voicemail and transcribing what she said. This particular message had started as a seemingly friendly check-in and then shifted midway through into something else. She had said, in a voice that was just slightly too careful to be casual, "Evelyn, I really think you'd be so much happier somewhere with a support system. Ryan worries about you in that house by yourself. And honestly, the longer things stay complicated between us, the harder it is on everyone especially you. You have to know that fighting this isn't good for your health. It's not good for anyone." That wasn't concern. That was a warning dressed up as concern. And I had the recording. Thomas had listened to it twice. "That goes in," he'd said when I first played it for him. "That goes in." We spent the next 2 days preparing. I barely slept. Not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the specific grinding energy of someone who knows that the next 72 hours will determine the shape of the years that follow. I went over my own testimony with Thomas until I could deliver it without my voice shaking. I organized my documents into a binder with labeled tabs. I picked out what I would wear. A gray suit I'd bought for a professional conference years ago, sensible shoes, no jewelry except my watch and my wedding ring, which I still wore on my right hand. I called Patricia the night before and thanked her again for her statement. She said, "You just make sure they see who you really are, Evelyn." And then, because Patricia was Patricia, she added, "And for heaven's sake, eat something before you go in. You can't fight on an empty stomach." I ate. I slept 4 hours. And on Thursday morning, I drove myself to the county courthouse. I want to tell you what it feels like to walk into a room where your own son is sitting at the opposing table. It feels like nothing you can prepare for. I had been preparing for 3 days. I had been preparing, in some ways, since the morning Vanessa appeared on my porch. And still, when I came through the door of that courtroom and saw Ryan sitting at the plaintiff's table in a dark suit with Vanessa beside him and their attorney Martin Cross on her other side, still, it landed like something physical, like a hand pressed flat against my chest. Ryan looked at me, just for a second. And in that second, I saw something move across his face, guilt, or the memory of guilt, or the ghost of the boy who used to sit at my kitchen table with his elbows on the wood and his hands folded and look to me to fix things. Then Vanessa leaned toward him and said something close to his ear, and he looked away. I sat down beside Thomas. I folded my hands on the table in front of me. I kept my face still. Judge Eleanor Marsh entered at 9:15. She was a tall woman in her 60s, gray-haired, with the unhurried manner of someone who had been in this room long enough to have seen every version of every argument anyone was likely to make. She settled at the bench, reviewed something in the file in front of her, and looked out at the room. "This is an emergency guardianship petition filed on behalf of Ryan Hart, petitioner regarding Evelyn Hart, respondent," she said. "Mr. Cross, your clients are requesting emergency guardianship on the grounds of cognitive impairment and inability to manage personal and financial affairs. You may proceed." Martin Cross was polished. I'll give him that. He was maybe 50, silver-haired, with the measured confidence of a man who had made this argument many times and won. He presented the petition's claims systematically. The social worker's assessment, Gerald Foss's statement, Ryan's testimony about the stove and the forgotten appointments, the argument that I was living alone in an unstable situation and required supervised care before I caused harm to myself or lost control of my finances. He was good. He made it sound reasonable. He made it sound like love. Then Thomas stood up. Thomas Hale was not a dramatic man. He did not have Martin Cross's silver hair or his practiced courtroom fluency. What Thomas had was precision, the kind that comes from caring more about accuracy than performance. He presented our response to the petition with the same methodical attention he brought to everything, and he did not rush. He started with Dr. Linda Marsh's evaluation. He asked her to walk the court through every assessment she had conducted, every result, every clinical finding. She did so clearly and without embellishment. Memory scores in the 81st percentile for her age group, executive function testing normal, processing speed normal. No indicators of cognitive decline, early dementia, or any condition that would impair her ability to manage her own affairs. Martin Cross cross-examined her. He asked about the limitations of single-point evaluations. Dr. Marsh acknowledged them calmly and noted that the evaluation had been comprehensive and that the results were unambiguous. Then Thomas called Patricia to the stand. Patricia, who was 71 and had lived next door to me for 16 years, gave her statement about the woman who had come to the neighborhood asking questions before the formal assessment had been officially scheduled. She was precise about the timeline. She was clear about what the woman had asked and what she had answered. She said, "At one point, I've known Evelyn Hart for 16 years. She's one of the sharpest people I know. I've never once worried about her ability to take care of herself." Martin Cross objected to characterizations. The judge noted it and moved on. Then Thomas played the voicemail. The room was quiet while Vanessa's voice filled it. That careful, smooth voice saying that fighting this wasn't good for my health, that things could stay complicated, that I needed to understand what was at stake. I did not look at Vanessa while it played. I looked at the judge. Judge Marsh was looking at the speaker on the table with an expression I could not entirely read. Neutral, attentive, the expression of a person processing information. When it finished, Thomas said, "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this recording as Exhibit F, as evidence of an attempt to discourage the respondent from pursuing her legal rights." "Noted," Judge Marsh said. "It's admitted." Martin Cross said the voicemail was being taken out of context. Thomas said the recording spoke for itself. The judge moved them along. Then it was Ryan's turn to testify. I had been dreading this most. Not because I thought Ryan was an effective liar. He had never been a good liar, not even as a child, but because I did not want to sit in a courtroom and watch my son say things about me under oath that were not true. I didn't want to feel that particular thing, and I knew I was going to feel it anyway. Martin Cross walked Ryan through his prepared testimony. The stove incidents, yes, both real, both minor, both involving me catching the issue myself within minutes, neither of which had resulted in any harm or damage. The forgotten appointments, 2 over the course of a year, one of which I'd rescheduled, and one of which I had not in fact forgotten, but had canceled deliberately and notified them about. Ryan described both as evidence of a pattern of increasing disorganization. He described my decision to rent the apartment as erratic and out of character. He described me in sum as a woman becoming untethered from her own life. I kept my hands flat on the table. I watched the judge. Then Thomas stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Hart," Thomas said, You mentioned the stove incidents as evidence of cognitive decline. Can you tell the court approximately when the first incident occurred? Last fall, Ryan said. September or October. And were you present when the incident occurred? No, Vanessa mentioned it to me. I see. And the second incident? Similar. I wasn't there personally. So both incidents you've described as evidence of your mother's decline were reported to you secondhand by your wife. A pause. Yes. Mr. Hart, are you aware that your mother made an $80,000 loan to you and your wife approximately 1 year ago? Martin Cross objected on grounds of relevance. Thomas argued the financial relationship was central to establishing motive. Judge Marsh sustained Thomas and allowed the question. Ryan shifted in his seat. Yes. And is that loan documented? Yes. Is it documented as a loan, not a gift? Yes. Has any portion of that loan been repaid? Silence. Ryan looked at his hands. No. Mr. Hart, if the court were to grant this guardianship petition and appoint you as your mother's guardian, would you, as guardian, have authority over her financial decisions and assets? In theory, yes, but that's not what this is about. Please answer yes or no. Yes. Thomas let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, no further questions, and he sat down. I testified last. Thomas kept it focused and simple. He asked me to describe my daily life, my routines, my financial management. He asked me to walk the court through my decision to consult an attorney and get a medical evaluation, both of which I had initiated on my own, without anyone's prompting, within 48 hours of Vanessa's visit. He asked me to describe the contents of the voicemail I'd received. Then Martin Cross cross-examined me. He was careful, and he was strategic, and he was clearly trying to make me angry, because an angry woman in a courtroom looks like the person they had described in the petition. He pushed on the apartment. Why had I moved out of my house? Wasn't that unusual? Didn't that suggest instability? I told him I had established a secondary residence to protect my financial interests, and that the lease was in my name, paid with my own funds, and represented a completely independent decision made with full legal and mental competence. He pushed on the loan. Wasn't it unusual to loan such a large amount to family without a formal process? I told him I had used a formal process. I had a signed agreement. I had a witness. I produced the document. He moved on. He pushed on my relationship with Ryan. Wasn't it true that this dispute had caused significant strain? I said yes, it had caused strain. He asked whether that strain might have affected my judgment. I said, no, Mr. Cross. Other people's behavior affects their judgment. My judgment is informed by the facts in front of me, which I have documented thoroughly. He sat down. I looked at my son across the room. Ryan was looking at the table. Judge Marsh called a 30-minute recess. Thomas and I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench and did not say much. He brought me a cup of water from a vending machine and I drank it. At one point he said, you did well. And I said, I know, because there was no point in being modest about it. When the judge returned, she did not take long. Having reviewed the petition and all submitted evidence, and having heard testimony from both parties, she said, her voice level and precise, the court finds insufficient medical or behavioral evidence to support an emergency guardianship determination. The respondent has provided comprehensive medical documentation, credible character testimony, and clear evidence of sound financial management. The petitioners have provided secondhand accounts of minor incidents and a social work assessment conducted under circumstances this court finds improperly documented. She looked up from her notes. What this court does find, she said, and her voice had changed quality, not softer, but more pointed, is that there is a significant financial relationship between the parties, specifically an undocumented, or rather, a documented but unresolved loan of significant size, and that the timing and structure of this petition suggest a connection between that financial dispute and this legal action. The court is denying the guardianship petition in full. She set down her papers. Ms. Hart, your legal and financial autonomy is fully intact. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, I would strongly advise you to resolve the underlying financial matter through appropriate legal channels. This court will not be a vehicle for asset disputes dressed as welfare concerns. The gavel came down. I sat for a moment after the sound faded. The room had that strange held breath quality of a space where something significant has just finished. I heard Martin Cross say something low to Ryan. I heard Vanessa's voice, tight, clipped, respond. Thomas put his hand briefly on my arm. Let's get your things. We walked out of the courtroom together, and I did not look back. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because the version of me that had walked into that room 3 hours ago had needed to prove something. To the court, to Ryan, to Vanessa, to herself. And the version of me that walked out had already proved it. The judge had said it plainly, in language that would sit in the public record. This had been a financial dispute dressed as a welfare concern. Not worry, not love. Strategy. My son and his wife had taken me to court trying to prove I was losing my mind, and instead they had proven something about themselves, something that, once entered into the record, could not be taken back. The November air outside the courthouse was cold and clean. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing it in. Thomas was saying something about next steps, about the financial agreement, about what would need to happen in the coming weeks. I heard him. I would be ready for all of it. But right now I just stood there on the steps, in the gray November light, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter and more durable than happiness. Something that felt like the ground under my feet being exactly where I'd left it. It held. I was still standing, and that was enough for today. The days after the hearing had a strange, suspended quality, like the silence after a very loud sound. I went back to my apartment. I made dinner. I sat on the balcony in the cold with a blanket over my lap and watched the bare oak trees move against the evening sky. And I felt more than anything exhausted, not defeated, not relieved, not yet. Just the deep bone-level fatigue of someone who has been holding themselves together under pressure for so long that when the pressure finally eases, even slightly, the body doesn't know what to do with the quiet. Thomas called the next morning with the formal confirmation that the petition had been dismissed and entered into the record. He walked me through what came next: the financial dispute, the loan, the repayment agreement that needed to be formalized before anything else shifted. He said it carefully and clearly, the way Thomas said everything. And at the end he said, "Evelyn, you should know that what you did in that courtroom was not easy. Most people don't have the presence of mind to document the way you did. You protected yourself. That matters." I thanked him. I hung up. I sat with my coffee for a long time. What I felt was not triumph. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect a courtroom victory to feel like a clear win, like something conclusive and clean. It didn't feel that way. It felt like surviving something that should never have happened in the first place. There is a difference between winning a fight and being grateful the fight is over, and what I had was the latter. I had proven my competence to a judge because my son and his wife had tried to take it from me. The fact that I had proven it did not make the attempt forgivable. Ryan called me 4 days after the hearing. I almost didn't pick up. I sat there watching his name on my phone screen through 3 full rings, and then I answered because I had never been the kind of person who avoided a hard conversation, and I wasn't about to start. "Mom." His voice was different. The defenses were down, or lowered at least. He sounded the way he used to sound when he was a teenager and had done something wrong and knew he couldn't talk his way around it. Can I come see you? Alone? When? Tomorrow, if that's okay." I told him tomorrow was fine. I gave him the address of the apartment, which he had never been to. When he arrived the next afternoon, he stood in the doorway for a moment looking around at the small space, the oak trees through the balcony window, the neat shelves, the files organized on the desk. And something moved across his face that I couldn't entirely name. Guilt, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like shame at the fact that his mother had built this life quietly, methodically, without his knowledge or his help, specifically because she'd needed somewhere safe from him. He sat at my small kitchen table. I made coffee. We did not hug, which told its own story. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Then start at the beginning," I said. "That's usually the right place." He was quiet for a moment, then, "It wasn't supposed to go this far. The petition. I knew it was too much. I knew it when we filed it, but Vanessa said—" He stopped himself. "Don't," I said, not unkindly, but firmly. He looked at me. "Don't make Vanessa the whole story," I said. "You signed the petition, Ryan. You testified. You sat across from me in that courtroom and told a judge I was losing my ability to manage my own life. I need you to own that, not just the parts that were her idea." His jaw tightened. A muscle worked in his cheek. And then, slowly, visibly, like someone putting down something heavy, he let it go. "You're right," he said. "I know you're right. The loan," I said. "I know. It was never a gift. You knew that. You signed the paper." "I know. And the plan. If the petition had worked, if I had signed what Vanessa brought to my house that morning, I would have lost the loan, I would have lost decision-making over my own life, and I would have had no legal recourse." "Ryan." I stopped because my voice had done something I hadn't authorized it to do. It had roughened, just slightly. "I gave you everything I had, and you let someone turn that into a weapon against me." He put his face in his hands. Not dramatically, not the way people do in movies with their whole body, just his hands over his eyes briefly, like he needed 1 second of not being looked at. "I know," he said, muffled. Then he dropped his hands. His eyes were red but dry. "I know, Mom. I don't have anything to say that makes it okay." That was the most honest thing Ryan had said to me in over a year, and I gave it the space it deserved. We talked for 2 hours. Not pleasantly, not in the way of a reunion, more like an excavation, slow, careful, sometimes painful, turning over things that had been buried to see what was underneath. Ryan told me that the plan to have me sign over the loan had been Vanessa's idea, originated before the wedding, which I had already suspected but still needed to hear him say. He told me that the stove incidents, the ones he'd testified about, had been things Vanessa had told him, that he hadn't witnessed either one, and that he'd repeated them on the stand without stopping to question whether they were accurate. He said this like a confession, which was what it was. I asked him if he had known about the fake social worker visit, the woman who'd come to the neighborhood asking Patricia questions. He said he hadn't known the specifics, that Vanessa had handled that part, that he had made himself not ask too many questions because the answers would have been uncomfortable. He said it with the bleak self-awareness of a man who is finally looking clearly at something he spent a long time avoiding. I did not comfort him. It was not the moment for comfort. But I listened, which was harder than it sounds, because listening meant holding all of it. The betrayal and the love and the particular grief of a mother who has to reckon with who her child actually is, not who she raised him to be. "What happens now?" he said. "Now," I said, "you and I sit down with Thomas Hale and we formalize the repayment agreement, the $80,000, with interest calculated at the rate Thomas specifies. Monthly payments, court supervision, every installment documented. Your name and Vanessa's, both on the agreement. He nodded. And the house? The property remains under my protected financial interest until the loan is repaid in full. That doesn't change. When the final payment is made, and only then, I'll determine what I want to do with that claim. Not before. He nodded again. He looked like a man doing arithmetic in his head, not calculating how to get out of it, I thought, but actually working out how to live with it. There was a difference, and I was watching for it. Vanessa isn't going to like the court supervision, he said. I know, I said. I'm not interested in what Vanessa likes. He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, but it almost did. Fair enough. I asked him one more thing before he left. I asked him whether, when Vanessa had described me as a problem on that afternoon I'd stood on their porch